Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of FinServ Tech Oracles. I'm Johna Johnson, here with my oracular colleague, Jerry Murphy.
Hello.
Hello, to share our thoughts on technology for financial services firms. Jerry, for this episode, you wanted to talk about a recent Nemertes Next conference and what you found compelling about it. So, from your perspective, what were the key elements of the conference, and what did you think about it?
Well, the first thing for people who don't know that our next conference is really about looking at future technology and how that future technology will impact business. So, on the technical side, there were some very interesting presentations. There's a presentation on getting drones to fly on Titan, which is one of the moons of Saturn, and it's just amazing to see all the technical challenges you have to overcome, but how they're dealing with it. Really interesting. Also, a really interesting presentation where a group of researchers from Johns Hopkins University showed the latest techniques on training robots using AI, and concluding them bringing a robot, which, if you can picture this, putting on a big bouncy beach ball and just having it balance randomly. Really fascinating to see, not just where the technology is, but their concepts about how you go about training it. We also kicked off the conference with a adaptive leadership workshop on how you can convince management on how to adopt new technology. And perhaps the most interesting presentation for me personally of the whole conference was there was a speaker who was really talking about the importance of storytelling. So this wasn't a technical person. This is a person that was basically an English major and a novelist. But her point was how critically important it is, in order to get people to understand your view, is to tell a story and to understand the importance of storytelling on both decision making, having people remember what you said, and trying to get people to act. So, and honestly, had I heard this talk 20 years ago, I think my own career might have been very different in terms of being able to convince people to do things I wanted to do.
Yeah, that was by Erin Bowe, and although
Yeah.
she is indeed a science fiction writer and novelist and English major, she also did work for many years at the Perimeter Institute, so she's very familiar with technology. And I thought her talk was great, also. Um, I really liked all of this and the conference as well. I would say, probably from my perspective, I thought it was really interesting to do the field trip, because that's not a common part of conferences. You don't usually get to go literally into the lab and have scientists and engineers tell you about what they're working on and touch and feel their projects. Not all of their projects, obviously. If they're working with toxic chemicals, you don't get to touch and feel them. But
Here, feel this plutonium. It's wonderful.
exactly, it's very warm.
Really clears your pores out.
Right. But that was actually fun. But let's double click a little bit on the things that you found fascinating about Erin's storytelling presentation. What were kind of the key takeaways that were aha moments for you?
Well, one of the first one was, how do you get people to remember information, right? And she went through this whole thing about people trying to remember sequences of numbers. And people are generally pretty bad at that, as you might manage, other than some nerdy geeks like myself who will remember your social security number better than your name. But that's an exception. But the point was, like, how do you remember information? She went back to when you're a kid. How do you does a little kid forget the alphabet? The answer is no, because you learn this song, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And it's like, nobody forgets that. And you think about important things you've learned throughout your life, very often, you attach them to emotion, or you attach them to some type of storytelling.
Yep.
And it just, so when I thought about it in hindsight, I'm like, you know what? That makes complete sense. And I think about my own life, the things I remember most are stories. And one of the most traumatic ones I remember was when I was a little kid. I still have, I shouldn't be embarrassed to say, I'm proud to say, my mom made me this stuffed dog when I was 2, which I still have, and I have to hide it from my wife because she was going to take it from me. But I remember having this traumatic dream where King Kong grabbed him and then carried him up to Mount Etna and threw him in the active volcano. And it's like to this day, I remember that trauma of having my toy. But, you think about things that have emotion, story, and then anything that you put around that, you absolutely remember for a long, long time. and in fact, what Aaron showed was that storytelling actually increases your retention rate from, like, say, 20% to 85%. And that's phenomenally huge, right? And so if you think about in the context of I'm trying to, brief my boss who's not technical on what's the important issue of my technology, and very often we get to the bits and bytes and what's happening technically that's different between something else technically, they're never going to remember that. But if I can associate them to, how this is going to, slam our competitors by some compelling story about a sales call or something like that, or what's some huge thing that's going to transform the business in some dramatic fashion with a story, they're far more likely to remember that. And consequently, they may be actually far more likely to support what it is we want to do.
Well, and Jerry, I would agree with you 100% on the importance of, and you and Aaron, of storytelling. In fact, there's a fair amount of research that's gone into anthropology. For example, the purpose of poetry and music is actually to remember history. So if you think about our ancestors sitting around campfires telling stories, the idea was if they wanted to remember something, they would set it to music, whatever music was in that culture, and put a story around it, and that embedded it in people's brains. The other thing that I've always found fascinating is that most people, on average, start remembering things from about the age of 3. It turns out that non-coincidentally, that's also the age at which you're able to form narrative. And so your memory actually starts at the point where you're able to create craft a narrative. And so probably your stuffed dog that you got when you were 2, you probably had that dream when you were 3 if you were average, which you aren't. But so yeah, I think that's fascinating. And in fact, storytelling and technology was a very, very interesting piece out of that. I would also say that the cool thing about the alt workshop that I liked was one of our clients immediately picked up on what we were doing and started using it himself to gain insight on a problem he was dealing with, having to do with the implementation of AI in his environment. So, once again, actually, if you think about it, alt already embeds narrative and story in its very methodology, and it also turns out to be a good way to solve brainstorming problems. So yeah, I guess more broadly, what are your final takeaways, I guess, from our Nemertes Next conference?
Well, I think one is, understand and embrace the importance and art of persuasion, and think about, how you might use storytelling as a part of that. We also might encourage people. We actually do these workshops on how to embrace change, and we actually walk people through exercises on trying to do this, because just like anything else, practice makes perfect. We know that when you're watching, movies or comedians, some of them are better storytellers than others. And how do you get better? By practicing. So I think, it would be great to use some, whether you're ours or somebody else's, do some workshops and plan on how you're going to do some of this convincing. And of course, I would be remiss to say, you should think about coming to our next conference in April in Nashville, Tennessee. We'll be doing more of the same there. And I think it would help see some of your ideas.
If you're a client, you should consider that. And if not, give us a call.
If you're not, become a client and attend.
Yeah, there you go. But I think these things are special and fun, and certainly the community that we've built around them is pretty special. So yeah, we love them. Okay, well, I think that's about it for us until next Tuesday at noon. Thanks again for watching and listening.
Take care.